So let's talk about the results of your research. So how many different studies were you able to look at, and what were sort of the main takeaways there?
Yeah, so as you said, our review looked at what we considered to be next day effects of THC. So basically, we were looking to identify any interventional studies, so studies where either cannabis or THC had been administered in some form, and then participants had been required to undertake or perform some kind of either simulated safety-sensitive task, so things like driving, or there's some studies on simulated aeroplane flying, or some more sort of standard and sort of common, I guess, computerized cognitive tasks. And there's a wide variety of those sorts of activities. And so to be included in the review, the studies had to have done this and measured performance at least 8 hours following cannabis use, because that's sort of what we considered to be I guess your typical overnight recovery period. And so studies, most of them administered the tasks between sort of 8 and 12 hours following cannabis use, and some administered all the way through. Often they conducted testing at multiple time points, so they might have measured at 12 hours and then 24 hours, and sometimes all the way up to 48 hours. So we found a total of 20 studies that had done this. A lot were published quite some time ago. There was a little bit of recent work, but largely historical. And they measured quite a number of different outcomes. I think it was several hundred different several hundred different tasks, and that's across all the studies at all the different time points and under all the different cannabis conditions. So often the studies would administer one dose of THC on one study and a different dose one dose of THC on one arm of one study and a different dose, a different arm in the same study. So you end up with the amount of data sort of just increases exponentially as you start to include these different arms and different time points. So yeah, it turned out to be a reasonably large undertaking, but yeah, that's what we included in our review.
Okay, and what were the results? Were you finding that people were impaired after 8 hours, or no?
So the vast majority of studies showed no next day effects of THC. So that was across variety of different cognitive tasks and simulated safety sensitive tasks. There were a small number of studies that detected next day effects, but I guess an important element of this review is not just to look at quantity, although there were an overwhelming majority showing no next day effects, but also to look at the quality of the studies and what they're sort of showing. And where we looked closely at this sort of small number of studies showing subtle next day effects, they tended to be not such good quality. So none of them were randomized controlled trials, for example, which is our most rigorous form of interventional study. And they often, and they didn't tend to have employ the best sort of standardization procedures. So what I mean by that is we're really interested in making sure that the studies we were sort of reading into didn't allow their participants to sort of consume alcohol 24 hours prior to, undertaking tasks, caffeine, stay up all night, all of those things that can go on to affect cognitive function. We wanted to be sure that they had been controlled out of the sort of context. So basically, the gist is that the studies that did show next day effects, which there were very few of, tended not to be great quality, whilst there was a couple among those showing sort of no next day effects that were quite good quality. So that seems to be where the evidence is at the moment.